Does the phrase imposter syndrome just make you want to cringe? Ooh. You are not alone. In this video, we are going to cover what imposter syndrome is. We are going to talk about the sources of imposter syndrome. And then of course, we're going to talk about tips for working with imposter syndrome as an author. Hi, hello, welcome. I'm Charlotte Chipperfield. I'm your book BFF. I'm a developmental editor and book coach, and I help writers get out of their own way to write the book that sits on their hearts. So what is imposter syndrome? I'm sure, again, that phrase might be evoking all sorts of emotions and maybe some discomfort right now, which is completely normal. Feeling the imposter syndrome is very much so feeling like you are a phony or a fraud, especially if you're trying something new. And so this happens very often with authors, especially as you're getting started out. I know for myself, when I first started writing, I spent years not wanting to call myself a writer, and God forbid the word author. That was scary. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I was worthy of owning that title. So imposter syndrome is really a fear of being called out as a fraud for not knowing what we're doing. So what are the sources of imposter syndrome? So I just mentioned that fear is often at the root of imposter syndrome, but really imposter syndrome can look different for different people. And so this is a very personal experience, but it often stems from our own self-doubt and our own criticism. It can be fueled by our sense of perfectionism or fear of getting started. It can also fuel our writer's block. It often shows up where we get stuck in that place of just looking at the blank page. All of these feelings can create a lot of resistance, and I'm sure you have experienced this. And so ultimately, the source of imposter syndrome is coming from a belief, or what we call in the coaching world a limiting belief. So this is a belief that is holding us back. And beliefs are our thoughts and these statements that each of us perceives as reality, whether it is true or not. And beliefs are what we gather from our experiences and the feedback that we get from our environment, whether that be our parents or school or religious leaders or the media. Examples might be, my writing's not good enough, or I'll never be a published author, or my writing is total crap. Which I bet you it's not. So again, the sources of imposter syndrome are going to be very personal to each one of us, but I invite you to kind of maybe sit with what could be behind that. Is it this belief in needing to be perfect, that perfectionism piece, or maybe it's just fear of owning the title of author because other people are going to call you out for not being one, which what does that even mean anyways? We're all authors if we sit down and love to write. If you've ever put words on the page, you're an author. So imposter syndrome shows up in many places for writers, especially along the writing journey. So I hate to break it to you, but this isn't a one and done process. Imposter syndrome is something that is going to continually to happen in our lives as we grow and expand into these new spaces that we want to hold. And I've noticed that in working with clients, there are some key milestones within writing specifically where imposter syndrome might kind of rear its head up and be like, hi, I need some attention. One is when you're getting started. So I think that's something maybe most of us have experienced. It could be what's preventing you from starting right now, or as you got started. This is a big area where that imposter syndrome comes up. And again, it took me years to own the title of writer or author, and I can so sympathize if you are in that place right now. And for me, I just knew I didn't have the tools to understand how to navigate and to move through that feeling, which we're going to dive into shortly. So another milestone along the writing journey that I often see imposter syndrome coming up with writers is when you're getting prepared to publish. So this is after you've gone through the writing process, you've gone through the editing process, and now you're preparing to launch a book into the world. And other people are going to read it, they're going to be able to buy it. Doesn't matter if you've gone traditional publishing or self-publishing. These are two milestones that are huge monumental events. So congratulations if you were at this point. It's a huge achievement. And this is, again, where it's going to feel a little sticky because, again, it's a new area that you haven't ventured into before. So that's okay. It's part of this process. And then the third milestone I often see with authors and my clients is that marketing of the book. So imposter syndrome will also come up at that stage because, again, that's brand new for a lot of authors. You are a writer. So writing the story is kind of your zone of genius. And as you nurture that book into the world, there are these other milestones that maybe don't feel as natural. And so marketing can be one of those things that's really hard to market yourself. We can definitely get in our heads, we can get in our own way. I know a lot of writers are introverts, and so it's really hard to put ourselves out there in that way. And so again, it's going to trigger some of those feelings of fear of not being perfect, of the fear of not being good enough, or a fear of not knowing what you're doing. So all of those things are playing into feeling like a fraud. Totally natural that they be coming up at these different points along the writing journey. Okay, so let's talk about tips for handling imposter syndrome when it comes up. Because I'm sure at this point you're kind of like, okay, Charlotte, I get it. I'm in that cringy feeling. I can feel it now. I've been experiencing it. What do I do about it? So really the first step in learning to work with imposter syndrome, and I say learning to work with imposter syndrome because we're not here to shame it, we're not here trying to push it away. We actually kind of want to invite it in and see if there's any insight and just sit with it for a moment. I know that can feel like the most uncomfortable thing in the world, especially with a more negative emotion, but if we're able to kind of sit with it and acknowledge it and kind of experience that feeling, it oftentimes sharpens the edges up. Oh no, it softens the edges of it. It doesn't sharpen. It softens the edges if it's feeling very cringy, pointy. Okay, so the first tip for managing imposter syndrome and working with it, and I say working with it because oftentimes I know imposter syndrome can feel really negative and crunchy and uncomfortable, and it's very easy to want to push it away. And so in being able to acknowledge it, we're kind of inviting it into this space to give it a little bit of space to expand and see if there's any insight in that feeling. And so by just acknowledging it, we can experience that feeling, and instead of just pushing it away, sometimes it just needs a little bit of space to breathe, to be like, hi, I'm here. And ultimately, imposter syndrome is trying to protect us because we're doing something new and that's uncomfortable. And so our brain and body and system is like, whoa, red flag. I don't know if we should be doing this. Is it okay to do this? So if we try to then like fix it or swing in the opposite direction of being very positive, that can also not work because that feels, again, like we're dismissing and pushing away that feeling. Okay, so once we've acknowledged that imposter syndrome is present, might be feeling uncomfortable, the next tip, as the writers we are, I invite you to take out a pen and paper or a journal and write down what it is that you're feeling or what you're feeling afraid of. So again, I provided some examples earlier that there could be a belief around not being a good enough writer, belief that you might never get published, and maybe a fear of failure or a fear of success. All of these things could be very true. Perfectionism, again, could be a big one. So just take a moment and just write down any insight that may be coming up. Then I would invite you to take this piece of paper when that feels complete, to take that piece of paper and just set it away from you. And it could be facing you on a chair, it could be on a different table, it could be across the room from you. And what I love about doing this is that it then makes your emotions separate from your physical self. And you can actually objectively look at them. And so it doesn't make the feeling so intense in your body or in your mind. There's kind of this exterior place that those emotions now have to go. So as you're looking at this piece of paper and your feelings, your beliefs, whatever insight you gleaned, I want you to look at that paper and then ask yourself, is what's on that paper always true for you or sometimes true for you? I know for myself as a female moving through the society that we live in, that there's a lot of messaging that I've received around not being good enough, not being thin enough, not being talented enough, you name it. Those beliefs are often put onto us from other people. Like I said, there's a lot that will come from media or that critical relative, wherever that may come from. And so there's a sense of like, that's not always true for me. Maybe I have thought about it once or twice in my life because I let that kind of into my sphere, my brain, but ultimately that's not always true for me. There's been times where my writing has been amazing and there's been times where my writing's not as good. Does that mean anything different about me as a writer and where I am on my journey? No, but it's hard to know that and be separate from it when we're in that feeling of like, oh my God, everyone's gonna find out that I'm a phony, which no one's coming for that, don't worry. And so I share all of that to say, don't beat yourself up because you might be uncovering or unearthing some beliefs that maybe just don't really serve you anymore. Okay, so here's a couple of questions then to further journal on to help gain a little bit more clarity. So the first question is, what about this experience or belief feels so scary? So this is a really great question just to dig deeper into those layers of the fear and see if there's anything that might be insightful in there. A lot of times fear is trying to keep us safe. And so by just acknowledging, like, I understand that you are trying to keep me safe, but I also had this big goal and we're going to continue to move towards that goal, and I will make sure that we're safe in doing so. So the next question is, if fear or this belief or whatever is in your way right now, if it wasn't in your way, what would you do differently? I love this question because the last couple questions have gotten us really into the feeling. And now, what would you do differently if this wasn't there? And again, it's not to dismiss the feeling, it's just to get our brains to expand into what else is possible. And so the last question to ask yourself is, what is one action step that you can take this week to help you move forward, either through that fear or move towards your goal in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming and doesn't feel too scary? And again, this can be super small. This does not have to be, I'm gonna go write 5,000 words. It could be, I need to go take a nap. Or it could be, I need to step away from my writing for a little bit so that I can spark my creativity back. Whatever that might be, just take a moment to think about, what's the one thing you can do in the next week to help you move forward towards your writing goals? So just to recap, imposter syndrome is all very personal to us, and it has many different sources, but it often stems from a limiting belief and or fear. And so when we're able to turn into that and kind of ask a few of these questions that I mentioned throughout this video, we can actually gain some of the insight that we need for that feeling to be less intense and for us to continue to make action towards our goals. So I'd love to hear, is there anything in this video I mentioned that has worked for you in working with imposter syndrome? I'd love to know in the comments. And then of course, be sure to subscribe and like this video, and I will see you next time.